The 38th floor of Vance Industries offered a sweeping view of Philadelphia. Power, suspended behind glass. Richard Vance had inherited this empire. He wore his authority like a tailored suit, effortless and absolute. Across the long mahogany table sat Cole Holdings. 3 sisters. No background, unlimited capital, and cold eyes. Evelyn Vance, the firm's top attorney, watched them closely. She was there to protect the family's legacy. The buyout offer was flawless. $340 million. Clean handover. No carve-outs. But Clara, the eldest sister, slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. A non-financial clause. A demand for a public statement, accompanied by a symbolic penalty of exactly $1. Richard glanced at the paper. A dry, dismissive laugh escaped him. To him, it was merely an insult. The sisters did not smile. They sat perfectly still, like hunters waiting for a trap to spring. Evelyn stared at the single-dollar clause. In the high-stakes world of acquisitions, cheap demands always carried the deadliest hidden costs. Late that night, Evelyn remained in her glass office. The city lights burned below her, indifferent to the secrets she was unearthing. She pulled the due diligence files on Cole Holdings. 3 sisters, seemingly born out of nowhere 8 years ago. But a deep search revealed a legal name change at 18. They hadn't just built an empire, they had buried their past. Their original address belonged to a rusted mining town, Hartwell, Pennsylvania. A place Vance Industries had long abandoned. And on every legal document filed before their 18th birthdays, there was one name listed as their guardian. Arthur Sterling. Evelyn typed the name into the corporate database. 14 high-level engineering patents appeared under his name. All of them belonged to Vance Industries. But after November 2004, Arthur Sterling simply vanished from the system. No resignation letter. No severance package. Just a single archived news clip about a system failure that cost a man his life. Evelyn printed the faded article. The ink felt cold against her skin. The pieces of a forgotten tragedy were aligning. She stared at the empty search bar. She knew exactly what she had to do next. The past was waiting in Hartwell. 20 years earlier, the rain in Philadelphia fell like a verdict. A 25-year-old Arthur Sterling walked out of Vance Industries with a cardboard box. He carried no severance and no recommendations. Only the crushing weight of a system failure he had tried to stop, and a friend who never returned home. Hours later, the harsh fluorescent lights of a county shelter illuminated a different kind of tragedy. 3 young girls sat on a cracked vinyl couch. Clara, Sophie, and Mia. They had nowhere left to go in the world. A social worker handed Arthur a clipboard. Temporary placement meant they would be separated into 3 different counties by morning. Arthur looked at them. The oldest had her hands resting defensively over her sisters. They did not cry. They simply waited for the end. He did not hesitate. Without a word, he signed the guardianship papers, tying his ruined future to theirs. That night, inside a freezing rental house in Hartwell, the 3 sisters slept huddled together in a single bed. In the kitchen, Arthur sat alone under a dim bulb, counting a desperate stack of crumpled bills. He listed the local repair shops on the back of an envelope. The genius engineer was gone. The father had to survive. Hartwell in late November was a town of faded paint and quiet surrender. It was no place for a luxury sedan. Evelyn drove slowly down Main Street, past empty storefronts and cracked asphalt, stepping into a world her family had erased. She parked across from a weathered house on Linden Street. The steady hum of heavy machinery drifted from the open garage. Stepping onto the gravel, her tailored designer suit and sharp heels felt like a trespass against the quiet poverty of the neighborhood. Inside the garage, a man was bent over a dismantled air compressor. He was 45, lean, and weathered by 2 decades of manual labor. At the sharp sound of her footsteps, Arthur Sterling looked up. His eyes held the profound stillness of a man who had long stopped running. She introduced herself cleanly. She gave her name and stated her position as the lead counsel for Vance Industries. Arthur did not flinch. He slowly wiped the heavy grease from his hands with a stained shop rag, never breaking eye contact. He did not offer his hand to shake. He simply stated that he had expected someone to arrive eventually. Evelyn observed him closely. Standing in a rusted garage, this mechanic exuded a quiet, absolute authority that she had never seen in any boardroom. Arthur invited her inside. As she walked past his workbench, Evelyn immediately noticed the layout of his tools. A drill press, calipers, and torque wrenches were arranged on pegboards with the obsessive precision of a laboratory. Pinned above the workbench, taped directly to the bare wood, was a yellowed, faded engineering schematic. Evelyn stepped closer. It was a highly complex diagram for a pressure relief assembly, dated October 2004. Across the bottom edge, faded but unmistakable, was a heavy red stamp, rejected, Sterling. She turned to him, asking if he knew that his 3 adopted daughters were preparing to completely acquire the company that had discarded him. Arthur poured black coffee from an old thermos into a chipped ceramic mug, his movements unhurried and calm. He handed her the mug, his voice low and steady. He said he knew they were doing something significant, but he had never asked for the details. He explained, without a trace of bitterness, that he never wanted them living their lives trying to settle his old scores. Evelyn held the warm mug. She had spent 15 years in corporate rooms with men who built nothing and shouted constantly. This man was the exact opposite. Evelyn's mind drifted back to the files she had read. 20 years earlier, the factory floor of Vance Industries was a deafening maze of steel and steam. Arthur Sterling, then a 25-year-old lead systems engineer, stood before a diagnostic terminal. His eyes tracked the metrics for production line 7. A critical flaw in the secondary pressure relief assembly was hiding in plain sight. He knew immediately that the line would eventually face a catastrophic system collapse. He drafted a formal refusal to sign the safety attestation. Arthur bypassed his direct managers and carried the document straight to the top floor, to a younger Richard Vance. Richard's office was soundproofed against the noise of the workers below. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, visibly annoyed by the intrusion. Arthur dropped the technical analysis on the desk. He explained precisely how the pressure buildup would cause an irreversible disaster. Richard barely glanced at the schematics. Shutting down Line 7 meant missing a massive international contract. To him, the math was simple. Richard coldly issued an ultimatum: Arthur would sign the clearance and keep the line running, or he would be removed from the building immediately. Arthur did not hesitate. He left the unsigned clearance on the polished mahogany and walked out, choosing his integrity over his career. 11 days after Arthur walked out of that office, the inevitable arrived. The factory sirens pierced the night. Production line 7 failed exactly as the rejected schematics had predicted. A catastrophic cascade of pressure and shattered steel. When the steam cleared and the machinery finally stopped, the senior line technician, Daniel Cole, did not return home. The corporate response was swift and entirely devoid of grief. Within hours, the legal department moved to erase the liability. Arthur was summoned to a sterile room. A thick non-disclosure agreement was slid across the table, accompanied by a heavy severance check. It was the price for his silence. The cost of burying the truth about his best friend alongside the man himself. Arthur looked at the pen, then at the suited men representing Richard Vance. He did not touch the paper. Instead, he stood up, his jaw set in cold defiance, and pushed the hush money back across the table. He was immediately escorted off the premises by security. Forced into the cold night with nothing but a cardboard box and his integrity. Hours later, standing in the silence of his empty apartment, the phone rang. A social worker was calling about Daniel's 3 little girls. To keep a roof over 3 orphan children, Arthur made his first permanent sacrifice. He sold the rights to his 14 engineering patents. Vance Industries acquired them through a proxy buyer for a fraction of their worth. Arthur knew he was being robbed, but pride could not buy groceries. The harsh Hartwell winters were unforgiving. Arthur transformed his pristine engineering mind into that of a blue-collar mechanic. He repaired rusted kerosene heaters and broken engines, often accepting warm meals from impoverished neighbors instead of cash. Inside the cramped kitchen, he would serve the hot food to the 3 growing girls, quietly taking the smallest portion for himself. Years slipped by in a haze of engine oil and sheer exhaustion. The brilliant system engineer faded into a grease-stained local handyman. But from the porch steps, 3 little girls watched him work every single day. They saw a man who built his entire world around them. Late at night, Arthur would sometimes open his advanced physics textbooks, only to close them and pull out a stack of unpaid utility bills. He placed his old blueprints and academic degrees into a cardboard box, sliding them into the dark corner of a closet, burying his own dreams forever. Standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching the 3 sisters sleep safely, his expression held no regret. The trade had been worth it. Evelyn walked back to her car under the pale moonlight. The gravel crunched beneath her designer heels, a harsh reminder of where she was. Inside the silent cabin of the luxury sedan, the heavy doors sealed out the cold. She gripped the leather steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time, her expensive suit felt like a uniform of complicity. The Vance legacy, an empire of glass and steel, had always been a source of immense pride. Now, she understood its true foundation. It was built on the silence of a ruined engineer and the stolen future of 3 orphan children. Her uncle, Richard Vance, had traded lives for profit and called it business. She had spent her entire career protecting that very system. The weight of the truth crashed over her. Arthur Sterling had asked for nothing, yet he had paid for everything her family owned. Evelyn pulled her phone from her purse. Her thumb hovered over the contact name of the lead corporate partner in Philadelphia. She did not press dial. The screen went dark, reflecting a woman who could no longer defend a lie. Starting the engine, she turned the luxury car around. She was not returning to the city, there was one more witness to find. By morning, the luxury sedan arrived in a quiet suburb south of Pittsburgh. Evelyn was looking for Marlene Hoy. Marlene had been Richard Vance's personal secretary. The woman who took the minutes for every corporate meeting that ever mattered. Evelyn knocked on the door of a small brick house. A woman in her 60s appeared behind the screen door, her expression guarded. Evelyn offered her business card, stating she needed to know what happened in the boardroom on November 23, 2004. Marlene did not open the screen. She stated she had signed a massive non-disclosure agreement and shut the door firmly. Evelyn retreated to her car. The legal walls her family had built were designed to be impenetrable. A cold, relentless rain began to fall, sweeping across the quiet suburban street. Instead of leaving, Evelyn stepped back out into the weather. She walked to the foot of the porch and stopped. She did not knock again. She stood in the freezing rain for 40 minutes, her expensive suit soaking completely through. The front door finally opened. Marlene stared at the shivering attorney and quietly told her to step inside. The living room was quiet and warm. Marlene poured 2 cups of tea, watching the powerful attorney shiver in her ruined suit. She did not ask for apologies. She simply stated that she had kept a duplicate of the November 23rd meeting minutes for 20 years. Marlene walked into the hallway and returned with a heavy manila envelope, sealed with dark red wax. It was her insurance policy. Breaking the seal, she placed 2 documents onto the wooden coffee table. The paper was dry and brittle with age. The first was a typed record. It clearly stated Richard Vance's direct order to alter the factory investigation and blame the tragedy on operator error. The minutes also commanded the immediate removal of Arthur Sterling, ensuring his warnings would never see the light of day. But the second document was far worse. A handwritten letter in blue ink, signed by Daniel Cole just days before the system failed. It was his resignation letter, detailing the exact mechanical flaw. Richard had intercepted it before it ever reached the engineering department. Marlene looked at Evelyn, her voice steady but heavy. She said she refused to leave this world carrying the weight of 3 orphaned girls. Evelyn carefully returned the ancient papers to the envelope. She now held the exact weapon needed to dismantle her own legacy. Evelyn drove east through the relentless rain. At a desolate gas station outside Carlisle, she finally pulled over. The engine idled in the dark. Beside her on the passenger seat, the heavy manila envelope rested like a dormant explosive. She closed her eyes, remembering the 3 Cole sisters in the boardroom. Their icy stares were born from a stolen childhood. She thought of Arthur Sterling in his rusted garage. A brilliant mind who had quietly surrendered his future so 3 little girls wouldn't lose theirs. And then she thought of Richard Vance. An arrogant patriarch who had built his glass empire on a foundation of discarded lives. Evelyn opened her laptop on the center console. The cold glow of the screen cast sharp shadows across her face. She opened her master defense file for Vance Industries, a meticulously crafted legal strategy designed to crush Cole Holdings. With a single, decisive keystroke, she deleted the entire file. Her loyalty to her bloodline vanished into the digital void. She picked up her phone and selected Clara Cole's private number. The screen illuminated the dark cabin one last time. When the call connected, Evelyn did not introduce herself. She said simply, "I have what you need. Call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." The morning sun offered no warmth to the 40th floor of Vance Industries. The emergency board meeting had been set for 9 sharp. Richard Vance sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by his directors. He looked supremely confident, unaware that his empire was already fracturing. The heavy glass doors swung open. The 3 Cole sisters entered the room, moving with an eerie, synchronized precision. Clara took the opposite end of the table without asking. Sophie and Mia sat to her right. They brought a freezing stillness into the room. Evelyn entered last. Rather than joining her uncle's legal team, she took a solitary seat near the center, her hands resting on a thick manila envelope. Richard frowned at her placement but quickly turned his arrogance toward the sisters, demanding the reason for the sudden interruption. Clara did not raise her voice. She simply slid a single, crisp sheet of paper down the center of the polished wood. It was the non-financial clause. The demand for a public restoration of Arthur Sterling's name. Richard scoffed, dismissing it as a childish morality crusade. He threatened to kill the $300 million deal entirely if the clause was not withdrawn. The 3 sisters did not react to the threat. They did not blink. They simply shifted their gaze in perfect unison toward Evelyn. The silence in the room was absolute. Evelyn Vance stood up slowly from her chair, drawing every eye at the table. She did not look at her uncle. She addressed the corporate record, her voice stripped of any familial warmth. She formally stated that she was withdrawing as lead counsel for Vance Industries, effective immediately, due to a severe material conflict of interest. Richard's confident sneer shattered into furious disbelief. He leaned forward, warning her that this was a career-ending breach of duty. Evelyn ignored the threat entirely. She picked up the heavy manila envelope she had carried from the suburb. With a swift, deliberate motion, she tossed the envelope into the center of the mahogany table. It landed with the weight of a judge's gavel. The four in-house attorneys stared at the broken red wax seal in utter shock. No one moved to speak. Richard aggressively ordered the legal team to intervene, but the senior independent director, Catherine, raised her hand, commanding him to be quiet. Catherine, a woman who had served on the board for 2 decades, pulled the envelope toward her and extracted the yellowed documents. As she read the original meeting minutes, the color drained from her face. A 20-year-old secret had just been dragged into the light. Catherine passed the meeting minutes to the director on her left, and the handwritten letter to the director on her right.
Appreciate your candor, Catherine.
The room fell into a terrifying silence, broken only by the crisp rustle of dry paper passing from hand to hand. A junior corporate attorney, realizing the magnitude of the liability, quietly slipped his agenda into his briefcase and zipped it shut. Clara Cole stood up. She reached across the table and took her father's handwritten resignation letter. She read it aloud, paragraph by paragraph. Her voice was perfectly even, unhurried, and devoid of any rising emotion. Richard made one desperate, furious motion toward his remaining counsel, but the lawyers simply looked away, abandoning him. A senior board member, a former federal judge, rose to his feet. His expression was a mask of legal absolute. He formally suspended the session, declaring an immediate internal investigation. Vance Industries no longer had the legal authority to sell. Catherine turned to Richard. Without a trace of sympathy, she ordered the former patriarch to leave the room. Richard stood frozen. In less than 10 minutes, his untouchable empire had been completely reduced to ash. Richard Vance moved slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he gathered his leather briefcase. The room watched him in absolute silence. He began the long walk toward the heavy glass doors. He did not look at the Cole sisters, he did not look at anyone at all. As he neared the exit, Mia, the youngest of the 3 sisters, rose smoothly from her chair. She walked the length of the table to intercept him. She carried no legal documents, only a small, faded photograph. Without uttering a single word, Mia placed the snapshot face up on the polished wood, right in Richard's path. It was a picture from 20 years ago. A younger Arthur Sterling and 3 little girls bundled in red winter coats, standing in a freezing garage. Mia looked Richard directly in the eyes for exactly 1 second. It was not a look of anger, but of absolute, quiet victory. She then turned her back to the fallen patriarch and walked calmly to join her sisters. The reckoning was complete. Richard stared down at the faces of the children he had cast aside. He did not touch the photo. He simply walked out of the room, leaving his legacy behind. Near the center of the table, Evelyn met Clara's gaze. The eldest sister offered the smallest, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement. The story broke above the fold on Monday morning. The headlines laid bare a 20-year cover-up at Vance Industries. By midday, every major business network was running the story. The internal minutes were quoted verbatim, clearing Arthur Sterling's name completely. In Hartwell, the local paper reprinted its own archived article, adding a front-page apology for failing to investigate the truth when it mattered. Things in the small town began to happen very quietly. A retired electrician walked up the gravel drive at Arthur's house. He left a foil-wrapped pie on the wooden porch and tucked a folded note underneath the pan. He did not knock. The pencil-written note read simply, "I knew part of it. I am sorry I stayed quiet." By Tuesday, the porch held 3 more silent offerings. Jars of peach preserves and warm casseroles from neighbors who carried the guilt of their assumptions. Arthur was in his garage, unaware that anything in the world had changed. He was tightening the belt on an old washing machine. Later that morning, he carried a repaired air compressor down Main Street, delivering it to the local bakery. The bakery owner, her arms dusted with flour, walked out from behind the counter and silently wrapped her arms around him. The town finally knew. That same afternoon, Evelyn drove back up to Hartwell. The maple leaves along Linden Street had turned to copper, falling quietly onto the asphalt. She parked across the street and walked up the gravel. She was no longer wearing the armor of a corporate suit, dressed instead in a simple gray sweater. Arthur was in his garage, tightening the final bolt on a transmission housing. The radio played softly in the background. He felt her presence before he saw her. He set the heavy wrench down on the workbench and turned around. They did not speak right away. Evelyn simply held out a crisp white envelope bearing the seal of Cole Holdings. Arthur wiped the grease from his hands with a rag, took the envelope, and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single-typed letter signed by Clara Cole, now the chief executive of the newly formed Vance Industries. The letter confirmed that the acquisition was complete. The non-financial clause had been executed in full, and his professional name was formally cleared. It concluded with a formal invitation. He was requested to attend a public press conference in Philadelphia as the guest of honor. Arthur read the letter twice. He folded it neatly into thirds, slipped it into the chest pocket of his work shirt, and looked at Evelyn. He asked if she wanted to stay for coffee. She gave a small nod, following him out of the dark garage. They sat together on the wooden porch in 2 old wicker chairs, leaving the weight of the corporate world far behind. The late afternoon light came in low across the maple trees, casting long, golden shadows over the quiet neighborhood. Arthur handed her a steaming ceramic mug. The hot coffee warmed her hands against the chill of the autumn air. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It was the peaceful, heavy silence of a war that had finally ended. A rusted pickup truck drove slowly down the street. The driver, a local man who had ignored Arthur for 20 years, slowed down. The man rolled his window down and raised his hand. It was not just a wave, but a silent, profound apology from the entire town. Arthur raised his own hand in return. He offered a small nod, letting go of the past without a trace of resentment. Evelyn watched him, captivated by his grace. She broke the silence, quietly mentioning that she had resigned from her family's firm. She was opening a small legal aid clinic in the city, to fight for people who couldn't afford a voice. Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet pride. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, the ground floor lobby of Vance Industries was transformed. 60 reporters and 12 broadcast cameras crowded the marble floor. A new corporate seal hung behind the wooden podium. It read, in bold navy letters, Vance Industries. It was the exact same lobby Arthur had been escorted through 20 years earlier, carrying nothing but a cardboard box. He had driven down from Hartwell that morning. His old truck was faded and rusted, but it still started on the first try. He parked 4 blocks away from the towering skyscraper, leaving the truck on a quiet, unassuming side street. He had no desire to pull up in front of the flashing cameras. He wanted to approach the building on his own terms. Arthur walked the final blocks with his hands buried deep in his pockets, staring up at the glass empire that no longer held any power over him. Inside, Catherine opened the conference. She formally read the conclusions of the internal investigation, confirming Richard Vance's immediate resignation. She added that the files from 2004 were being handed over to federal labor authorities for a complete review. The room was perfectly still. When the legal formalities concluded, Clara Cole stepped up to the podium. Her sisters stood firmly at her shoulders. It was time for the truth. Clara read from a short, prepared statement. She formally confirmed the buyout and the creation of Vance Industries. Then, she set the paper down. She looked out over the sea of cameras, her professional demeanor softening for the very first time. She asked the room to direct their attention to the man who had made it possible for her and her sisters to have a life at all. Arthur stood up from the front row. He wore no suit, no tie. Just a simple gray button-down shirt, his hair combed neatly for the occasion. He walked to the podium without rushing. The room went entirely quiet. Only the rapid clicking of camera shutters filled the silence. Arthur reached the microphone. He held no notes in his hands. He simply looked out at the massive crowd. He spoke slowly, stating that 20 years ago, he didn't know how to be a father. He only knew that if he didn't take them, they would be separated. He said Daniel Cole was his friend. He made it clear that he had never done a single thing in the last 2 decades expecting to be paid back. But if today meant that Daniel Cole's name was finally spoken with respect, he would accept the honor, for Daniel, not for himself. Arthur stepped back from the microphone. For a long moment, the entire press corps remained frozen in silent reverence. The spell broke. The 3 Cole sisters moved from the podium at the exact same time. They abandoned their rigid corporate posture, walking quickly across the marble floor toward the man who had saved them. In front of the entire world, they threw their arms around Arthur in a fierce, unbreakable embrace. The lobby erupted. Dozens of camera flashes fired simultaneously, immortalizing the end of a 20-year journey. Arthur's large, calloused hand came up to rest on Mia's shoulder. The closest camera caught the small, involuntary shake in his fingers. Mia was the only one of the 3 who was openly crying, burying her face into his simple gray shirt. Clara had her eyes closed, her hand resting flat and steady against his back, anchoring him. Far at the back of the lobby, completely removed from the flashing lights, stood Evelyn Vance. She leaned against a cold marble column with her arms crossed, watching the family she had helped reunite. She did not step forward to claim any credit. She simply smiled, perfectly content to remain in the shadows. Late November in Hartwell settled into a quiet, golden dusk. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound stillness. Arthur was back on his porch, driving a final nail into a freshly cut cedar plank for a broken step. Evelyn arrived as the sun dipped low. She brought 2 paper cups of coffee from the local bakery. She sat down beside him on the raw new wood. They drank the coffee in comfortable, unbroken silence. A soft buzz broke the quiet. Arthur pulled his phone from his shirt pocket. It was a video call. Clara, Sophie, and Mia, calling to check on him, just as they had every Sunday for 15 years. He didn't speak much. He listened, nodded, and quietly made sure each of them was taking care of themselves. When the screen went dark, the porch returned to the gentle rustle of dry maple leaves. Arthur looked out at the street. He said softly that 20 years ago, he walked out with a cardboard box, never expecting an afternoon like this. Evelyn did not reply. Her hand rested on the wood, inches from his. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to.